We have quite a special evening tonight, and I'd just like to give a quick statement about where we are right now in this whole process in San Mateo County. We started, as you know, 3.5 years ago on this long path and have actually made significant progress. As you know, the Board of Supervisors stood up ICAC, the Independent Civilian Advisory Commission. Not quite everything we wanted from our original ask, but we know things are a work in progress. I call that about 20% of where we are right now. But this wonderful new commission, ICAC, has actually made already their top three goals that we also had written about and have been proponing in all of our efforts. The top one is to get an inspector general. So I hope you've been reading and hearing a lot about that. Actually, I hope every one of you has been in Board of Supervisors meetings helping make public comment to help refocus their attention. We recognize that there's so much going on with the issues in the sheriff's office right now and with the current sheriff that the board is very occupied in that arena. However, we do not want them to forget about, in fact, we'd like them to link the helpfulness of oversight to such a situation like that, recognizing that having a civilian oversight board and an inspector general can really open helpful tools for the board to be able to nip a lot of this in the bud. Helpful both for the deputies and all of the people who work in the sheriff's office, as well as we residents with public safety. We also have been looking, as you know, a lot into the jails. And two more recent issues, in addition to the deaths that unfortunately have been happening, two other issues are the elevators have not been working for 2 months now. And if elevators are not working, the jail says no visitors, meaning cutting off all human interaction, person-to-person interaction for all of the incarcerated. The elevators apparently are going to take maybe up to 6 months to fix. We think there are ways about that. So we have a number of people on that case right now, and at least the board now knows about it. It had not been known before. The other issue, and Reverend Lauren has been so helpful on this too, is that there are very sporadic, not at all regular clergy visits. And a lot of this was closed down during COVID, as you probably know, but it has not gone back, even though we have vaccines now, it has not gone back to the regular scheduling at all. And as people on the screen can attest who have been inside, those moments with a clergy person, a person of faith, can be so meaningful, so especially helpful to someone going through this situation, but also the internal reflection and thinking as their sentences play out. So we are working on those fronts as well. We are not bored or taking a vacation on any of this. And thank you for everyone here who has been involved helping us with this. We have a very special speaker tonight in McEllhiney, who was one of Fixon's very first advisors. And we were so unfeignedly grateful to be able to meet her. Cami was with NACOL at the time, which is the national group to really advise, to learn and advise counties as well as cities on civilian oversight. And everybody we know who's known anything about this has relied on NACOL, has contributed to NACOL. And we recently were lucky enough in the Bay Area to have a fabulous summit and conference that Cami and her team put on. Cami now being the executive director of all of NACOL. Cami and her team spent 2 days out here with absolutely stellar speakers. And I was lucky enough to be able to attend that. And I counted today, I took 12 pages of notes. Such fabulous speakers, so many follow-ups, and you will meet some of those people in our future all hands. Luckily, because a number of them have agreed to come visit us. if any of you can go in future years, and Cami, I'm sure this will become an annual event. Just saying, we'd like to underline that. Um, Cami herself has been with NACOL over 20 years now and has been in a good number of roles, including education and training. And of course, that's one of the first things we tapped her for. We wanted to know, what does a gold standard oversight, civilian oversight situation look like, ideally with an inspector general? And what really should we ask for in the end? And even rank order, what are the most important things to ask for? And of course, along the way, we have said, Cami, this just happened. What do we do about that? Or where is there a good example of? And Cami also was hired by our own county supervisors in their early days of beginning to look at oversight, in order to have Cami help guide them, given the richness and depth of all of her experience. Cami, Cami also majored in, now I'm going to get this wrong, I realized I didn't write that down, political science and something. So please tell us what it was, because you will see there's a track here that makes great sense for her. Cami, over to you.
Thank you so much, Elsa. I I, I want to say it is so lovely to be here to see um, a lot of familiar faces and to also see so many new faces to me. Anyway, I know that all of you are very involved in the work that you're doing in the area, and it's great to meet you, even if just virtually. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation from Fix in San Mateo and the California Coalition for Sheriff's Oversight, and the Committee for Law Enforcement Accountability. Now, I really appreciate um, your willingness to have me speak. I don't always get to speak on just oversight in general. A lot of times I have a very specific topic, training topic that I'm given. And so I'm really excited to talk to you about these things this evening. Um, I've had the privilege of working with some of you over the last few years, having conversations about what oversight might look like, whether at the county or the municipal level with some of you, talking about the necessity of different authorities, whether it be the ability to independently investigate, have subpoena power, make disciplinary decisions versus just recommendations. We've also had a lot of conversations about the frustrations of the meet and confer process, as well as the level to which law enforcement should be involved when oversight is being designed for a community. And I will say there also have been several conversations about the give and take involved in instituting civilian oversight, and how that give and take just never seems to end, even once the mechanism has been implemented. Um, so tonight, I've been asked to come and talk to you about my thoughts on civilian oversight trends and lessons learned. I have been in the oversight realm since I was appointed to a civilian review board in Indianapolis, Indiana in 1998, a board that oversaw the Indianapolis Police Department. Shortly after my appointment, I became involved in NACOL. Just as a side note, one of the founders of NACOL happened to be the executive director of the office that my oversight entity was a part of. I became involved in NACOL and learned that the world of civilian oversight was much bigger than the version that I saw in my city at that moment in time. And ever since, I have dedicated myself to learning about civilian oversight and improving it. And I've also dedicated myself to knowing that oversight works better when people have the training that they need. And so trying to get educational information out to not only those doing the work of oversight, but also to those who are thinking about implementing or enhancing oversight so that effective, sustainable practices can be put into place. As a result of all of this, I have learned many things. I've learned to be very patient. None of this is ever a quick process, as all of you in this meeting know. And to understand that there is always a lesson to be learned. No matter how much I think I know about civilian oversight, there's always a perspective to take in, a nuance to better understand, and a way to look at things from a different point of view. Being able to do these things, I believe, will help me in my work to build better and more effective civilian oversight in a way that leads to better law enforcement, jail, and prison practices. So to really dig into this conversation to begin it, I want to start with some basic universal truths about civilian oversight. And I apologize if you've ever heard me speak. You've heard me say these things before, but hopefully I can add one of those little nuances that I was talking about earlier for you. So first of all, I want to say that no two civilian oversight entities are alike. This leads, well, I will say, we have categories, models that we can put different oversight mechanisms in, and then we have this catch-all category, the hybrid model. But we can then say, well, that hybrid model is part review model and part auditor monitor model. However, still no two are exactly alike. And that leads to the problem answering questions like questions that we get all the time. What is the most effective type of oversight? Or a question like, can you point to a study that has been done that actually proves civilian oversight is effective? We get that one a lot from political figures and from law enforcement. However, the problem is that when no two are exactly alike, maybe even more importantly, that there is no standardization among oversight agencies in regards to the data that they are collecting, it's hard to do the research that is dependent on quantitative data. What we're left with, however, is qualitative data, which is very useful when we're talking about practices that are deemed effective in different jurisdictions. However, even with that, there are people that just want to see numbers. Also, civilian oversight is both reactive and proactive. At one point, many civilian oversight entities were primarily reactive mechanisms. Agencies were developed to address misconduct that occurred. In other words, you had to wait for something to happen to do something about it. In addition, they were almost always developed in reaction to a specific incident. Well, really, still, almost all civilian oversight agencies have an origin story, a story with a name attached to it representing a great tragedy and the need for reform. However, over the last several decades, we have seen oversight emerge that is much more proactive in nature. Some jurisdictions have even developed oversight in response to the need for reform and not necessarily a specific incident. We're also seeing more proactive work within the mechanisms themselves and the authorities that they carry. Things like being able to do audits, being able to monitor, the creation of policy recommendations, work that is specific to ensuring accountability and a means to improve practices rather than allowing them to stay stagnant, even when they're not working or they don't make sense. Another universal truth is it's really hard to say the exact number of oversight agencies that are currently operating in the United States. If you've ever heard me talk, I'm sure you've heard me say, leading into 2020, we had approximately 200 civilian oversight entities in the country. Following the murder of George Floyd, we saw this enormous amount of a creation of oversight, and more quickly than we had at any other point in oversight's history. At one point, we said that there were probably or approximately 250 oversight entities throughout the United States. We still are able to say that there's approximately about 230, but that figure really depends on the definition of oversight. For instance, would you consider an agency that only is advisory in nature to be civilian oversight? Or maybe would you exclude an entity that's made up of only volunteer members that, while they may not be able to do or have a significant role in investigations, they can make recommendations? I've seen people have different answers to these two questions posed. In fact, civilian oversight experiences a difference of opinion amongst its supporters on many topics, not just what counts as oversight and what does not. Over the years, I've seen many shifts in civilian oversight. I've seen periods where it was unforgivable to work with law enforcement in any capacity. I've seen the mentality towards that shift over time. I've seen periods where people would defend any type of civilian oversight because something was seen as better than the option of having nothing at all. But then there's the question, is something, regardless of the authority it has or who it answers to, better than nothing? Well, if you were to ask someone in Florida right now who had all of its oversight entities wiped out with the passage of HB 601 in 2024, their answer might be yes. But if you were to ask a community who has a volunteer board without permanent staffing, their answer might be no. Depending on who you ask in the community, the answer might vary. I know that even though every one of us on this call is interested in civilian oversight, its effectiveness, and its ultimate success, we would still not always agree on the necessary processes, the must-have authorities, or the methods to go about creating oversight. So let me kind of take this in a slightly different direction now. So the fact that the world of police reform seems more precarious now than in recent memory is something that we really need to talk about. To be honest, civilian oversight finds itself in a very interesting place right now. Even before we've turned the page on 2025, civilian oversight was already under attack. We've seen successful state-level preemption efforts across the country in states such as Utah, Arizona, Tennessee, Florida, and most recently, Iowa, each one more devastating than the one that preceded it. But now the attacks are also local and not always labeled as a clear attempt to eradicate civilian oversight. Sometimes it's much more subversive and undercover. Now, that's not to say there haven't always been workings to undermine civilian oversight. But I have to say, recently, I have not had a conversation with those in the oversight world without hearing things like my budget has been cut. I'm not able to get the training my staff needs. The court ruled I can't do independent investigations. Little things in the world of oversight. I think we need to be honest. The government bodies who enacted the legislation to enable civilian oversight don't always stick around for the long haul. And right now, that seems to be an epidemic. Unfortunately, civilian oversight rarely enjoys the support it has right after its creation. When the need for police reform is prevalent in the news, when bad things happen and people want to look like they are there to be part of the solution. And I'm not saying that to say that everyone is like that, but definitely we see that happen in jurisdictions. But in order to be successful, it needs to have continuous support and buy-in. It needs funding, it needs independence, it needs access, it needs the staff necessary to carry out the work it is mandated to do, and it needs these things continuously, not just when it's convenient or popular. In the words of the late John Crew, a tireless advocate for fair policing and effective oversight in Northern California, oversight is not about bad cops, it's about good government. And good government doesn't happen without support. So perhaps it's time that we shift our focus and work to build consensus around civilian oversight as being a permanent and necessary part of every public safety system. This is when I start getting a little idealistic, in case you haven't picked up on that yet. But I think that this is really important for us to talk about this piece. Let's imagine a moment where we did not spend countless months, sometimes years, and immeasurable amounts of energy working to develop an oversight system. A time where every jurisdiction had a structure in place that allowed for the auditing or monitoring of law enforcement practices, policies, training, supervisory practices, where community boards were a part of a permanent structure to provide input, making sure that there was clear communication between law enforcement and the community they serve. And a built-in supervisor, the oversight entity, or I'm sorry, a built-in facilitator, the oversight entity itself. To many, this might seem unattainable, but I think it is the route we need to start taking. We need to follow the lead of states that have already started working towards this goal. Although they may not be perfect models, and I would be honest and say they are not, Maryland and New York are two states that have enacted legislation. Virginia has enacted legislation also very similar to AB 1185, but on the law enforcement side of things, and in that it clears a path for civilian oversight of police, much like AB 1185 clears a path for sheriff oversight. In addition to a grand plan of making oversight a permanent part of public safety, I think we need to take a moment to talk about the lessons that we've learned and need to think about in our journey to create it as a permanent part of public safety. Lessons that we can apply to future oversight creation and enhancement efforts. So first of all, those conducting oversight should be immersed in the community. Although they might not necessarily need to come from the specific community they're working in, they do need to have an understanding of the community. Do they know its history? Are they willing to learn the nuances of the community they will need to work with to ensure success? Are they willing to sit down and build collaborative relationships with all of the stakeholders involved? Also, oversight needs to hold itself accountable. Assessments need to happen so that improvements can be made to the model over time. It should not remain stagnant, kind of like the policies, policing policies, as I mentioned earlier. In fact, I would say that it would be difficult for it to be effective if it does not adapt and improve its practices over time. And in order to move forward and continue the very important and necessary work, there are a few suggestions I have as a starting point. Work with law enforcement to help them better understand how to communicate with their communities. So it's not just about working with law enforcement, it's about helping them work with community. I've said this many times, community engagement and involvement is civilian oversight's superpower. There's no better conduit between law enforcement and the community. Next, work with law enforcement to help them, next, collaborative relationships are key. I have to say it, adversarial relationships have not worked for us. And I understand, I am not completely oblivious. I understand that it takes both sides investing in the right relationship to make it happen. However, help people understand that collaborating with an entity is not the same as being co-opted by it. But how do you help community, actually all stakeholders, understand this? Because it goes both ways. I'm sure all of you have existed in jurisdictions where if you work with community, you are seen by the law enforcement as being co-opted by the communities, and vice versa. Community, if you work with law enforcement, you might be seen by the community as having been co-opted by law enforcement. So how do you help get past that? By being as transparent as you expect law enforcement agencies to be. Is there a falling out? Own it. If there is a need, ask for it. If there's a failing, own it as well. If there is a misunderstanding, educate. If there's an underlying issue, expose it and offer suggestions to move forward. And let me underline that. Exposing issues is important, but also taking the time to think about what solutions there are for those issues is equally as important. And while I wish this were not the case, I wish that civilian oversight practitioners could just come in and do the work. If they were investigators, that they could just come in and investigate. If they were a monitor, an auditor, they could just come in and do the work that they specialize in. However, the reality is that they need to take time to learn a lot of things. They need to learn the politics of their jurisdiction and how to navigate them. They need to understand trauma in 100 different ways, whether it's the trauma of community members, the trauma of the police or sheriff, the historical trauma, the work that works its way into almost every law enforcement encounter, the trauma experienced by those doing the work of oversight. They need to better understand how to support their staff, how to navigate budget season, how to understand that not everyone is a great leader, but that does not mean you cannot become one. And otherwise, take time for training and make room for staff to do the same. And as community members, you need to demand that oversight has the support it needs in all of these areas. In reality, we often focus on the authorities and oversight and that an oversight entity should have. Things like whether or not there's, subpoena power, discipline authority. We focus on the composition of boards and the appointment of boards. All of that is incredibly important. But we also need to focus on how to support the work in the long term and know that the start of an oversight agency is just that. It's the very beginning, the start. There is so much to be done, and it doesn't help when the work, particularly now, feels as if your one step forward is always followed by 2 steps backward. And I hate saying this, but I do feel confident that there will be, unfortunately, a rebound. Something will happen that will help people remember the importance of civilian oversight. I hate to say that, but I feel it's true. I suggest before that happens, we use this time to develop the standards that will lead us to better, more effective mechanisms, that we begin building the support needed to move towards systems that support civilian oversight as a given and not just a possibility. So again, those are just a few of my thoughts on where we are and where we're going and some lessons learned. I really do, again, appreciate the time to share them with you, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with all of you.
Thank you so much, Cami.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do have some wonderful questions here, Cami, and we'll start with the first one, and that is, how essential do you think subpoena power is to the effectiveness of sheriff's oversight?
So I think that subpoena power is an important authority to have. And the reality is that in many oversight entities across the country, you don't see them using it very often. So that might lead you to say, oh, well, maybe it's not needed then. I have to say, having subpoena power in your back pocket is a useful tool. Um, and some might say that having it often leads to you not having to use it because they know you have it. So I think that having it is an important tool, and AB 1185 clears the way for you to have it, and you should.
Okay, very good. What's a good method for assessing qualitative change?
That's a great question and a hard one. So most often I would leave questions like that to the researchers, because I will say, a researcher I am not. However, I will say we have done lots of case studies over the years, looking at other oversight systems and looking and seeing what they're doing that they believe is working. And then making sure that civilian oversight and just communities in general know about those practices. And also help them understand that regardless of the type of oversight, and more importantly, the size of the jurisdiction or the agency being overseen, it's important to remember that effective practices can be adapted in any jurisdiction. So for instance, if you're looking at a really good practice that's happening in New York City for those who do oversight of the New York Police Department, whenever I talk about those practices, people are like, we are not New York City. We do not have the NYPD. That doesn't mean it's not an effective practice, and it doesn't mean it can be implemented in a scaled back manner. Likewise, small jurisdictions are doing really good work, and we shouldn't discount them just because we are a larger city. I often get questions, particularly from government entities, who want to see the type of oversight in every city that's the exact same size as theirs. And although that might be good for budget and size of office in certain instances, I will say I have not met a civilian oversight agency that is over budgeted or overstaffed yet. So I don't want to say that that's like a great great way for them to look at budgets or staffing.
Right.
But I think that it's often good to say, what do you want to accomplish? And then start looking at every jurisdiction who's doing those same types of things.
Okay, great, great. And how do you think an inspector general and a civilian board should work together without clashing or duplicating efforts?
So I think the first part is that there needs the ordinance and the operating procedures are really important. They need to clearly define everybody's role. I think what happens is a lot of times there is gray area, and so there starts to be issues with who is responsible for what. So that's the first thing I would suggest is make sure that roles are clearly defined,
Okay,
whether that's by ordinance or operation procedures.
okay.
But then also, I think that there needs to be an understanding of what everybody brings to their roles. An inspector general, is doing the work every day and brings certain skills to that work, and therefore should be trusted to do the work that they've been hired to do. The community knows the community. They're in the community every day. And so their information is really important to the process. So allowing them to be a conduit for community concern, community information, to make sure that the work that's being done is community informed is also really important to honor.
Okay, very good. And is the board of supervisors that can use subpoena power at the request of an oversight board an acceptable substitute for the oversight board having direct authority?
Wow. So, I feel like I don't have a great answer to that question only because I haven't given it a tremendous amount of thought. Because in most cases, and as the original legislation talks about, that power is for the commission and the IG to have. I will say that I'm going to skirt the question just a little bit. So I know what I'm doing here. I know I'm skirting it. But I will say that if we're looking at effective practices and principles of civilian oversight, having political independence is important. Whether it's political, structural independence, it's really important so that an oversight entity can always act with that level of independence that shows that it is not um, working for one stakeholder or another, that it is working for the process. And so if we're to look at that principle solely, there is the possibility with subpoena power being held by this other entity outside, or control of that authority being held by an entity outside of the oversight mechanism itself, that could be problematic.
Okay, very good. Another question about oversight: how much should our local oversight coalition defer to the politicians who vocally support oversight, but continue to have good reasons to delay implementing any oversight mechanism?
That's like the $1 million question. That's a question that I'm sure I've heard in almost every community I've ever talked to. Although I will say it's nice that you have politicians who do vocally support it. So there is an upside there. I think that until you have oversight implemented, that you continually push.
Okay, okay.
I know that and I mentioned earlier, knowing the political nuances of whether it's the board of supervisors or you're in a city and you're looking at a council, navigating that is important, and navigating it with a certain amount of finesse, but not completely handing over the reins to someone else if something's not happening.
Okay, okay. And do you see any value in having sheriffs being hired by the county board, like board of supervisors, versus elected?
I'm just going to say that regardless, they need to have oversight.
Okay. Okay.
I've seen it both ways in different jurisdictions, and I will just leave it at regardless, they need to have oversight.
Okay. And do you think community groups' time is better spent trying to convince current supervisors to support oversight, or would it be better off working to elect supervisors who already support oversight?
So I think it's a multi-prong approach. So I have seen jurisdictions go both ways, that where there is a lot of work done to convince current supervisors of the necessity and the benefits of civilian oversight. And then I've seen communities when they get to a point where they are done banging their head against a wall, they start throwing their hat into the races. And so I think both approaches are beneficial depending on where you are in your process and how much support you think you have.
Okay, very good. So I have a two-part question here.
Okay.
What, in your experience, in California or nationally, have you had with sheriff unions, how they have influenced or shaped the implementation of oversight bylaws through the meet and confer process, particularly when those bylaws include community-driven accountability measures?
So I haven't seen a meet and confer process. Now, I have not been a part of all of them. I don't know about all of them, but in the ones that I have seen, I have rarely seen an oversight entity or ordinance go into that process and come out the same. And um, sometimes the process is or the change is minimal, that the overall effectiveness of the entity remains fairly unscathed. But I will say that whether we're talking about the meet and confer process specifically in California, or just if we're just talking about unions in general, um, in jurisdictions where unions are strong, they tend to be an inhibitor to effective oversight. And sometimes that is because I'm not in their heads, but from what I've seen, I think sometimes that's a, reaction of, I'm here to serve my members at all costs. And that butts up against community members who are there to serve community members at all costs.
Mhm.
Some of the things that I've seen, if we're talking about solutions, in some jurisdictions I've seen where members of the union, leadership of the union, have been brought into the process, if not directly, then peripherally, in the sense that they're getting information about civilian oversight, real information. Because I have to tell you, they are getting and they're giving information whether they actually know anything about civilian oversight or not.
Okay.
And so educating them as much as you can about oversight and what it actually can do and what it won't do and what it can't do is really important. Because most of the time their words and their actions are often not fully informed about oversight and most importantly, its benefits to law enforcement.
Okay. Okay. And do you have an example of a jurisdiction where oversight is doing community engagement well? And what might that look like?
Yeah, there are some good ones. I will say that, and this has been the case for many years. Denver, I'll just throw them out. There are a lot, but Denver is a great example. They have a civilian review board and they have a monitor. And the two act fairly independently of one another. There is some crossover, but the community engagement team and the board do a tremendous amount of outreach. And in addition to that, they've done things like put together programs that bring youth and law enforcement together They've collaborated with law enforcement to help inform them not only a community about law enforcement practices, but also inform law enforcement about the community, about doing training specific to understanding youth brain development, historical trauma. So they've been doing a lot of things that are beyond what we see in many jurisdictions, like the traditional tabling, where you go to every community event and let them know that there's this complaint process. That's important too, absolutely. But then also finding ways, because again, this is the superpower of civilian oversight, really digging in there and figuring out ways that you can bring the community and law enforcement together.
Okay. Thank you. And do you have any thoughts, or have you seen where oversight bodies are being funded using a percentage of the police or sheriff's budget?
Yeah, there are quite a few. In fact, there's a trend and has been a trend for some time moving in that direction. Um, so I am actually, to be honest, not aware of one that is sheriff specific, but there are a lot of oversight entities that do police that are. The San Francisco's Department of Police Accountability has a percent. Actually, I think they have so many investigators for every. They have an investigator for every 100 officers. Denver has a percentage. New Orleans has a percentage. So there are quite a few throughout the country who are moving in that direction.
That's great. And how do you navigate local politics and historical trauma to build support for what is needed for creating civilian oversight?
Wow. So I think I feel like that is a question for someone so much smarter than I am. But I will say that um, education. I think that there are many people, while they don't understand what historical trauma is, particularly if they don't have it. And so making sure that people have an understanding of that, yes, it exists, what it looks like, and how to encounter it, how to interact with that trauma, because you can't make it go away, but be very sensitive to it. And I think education is the place to start. I realize that's not really an answer to that question, but that's as
Big
close as this brain is.
Okay. Do you know if there are any California-wide organizations that assist line staff or command staff unions are actively working to minimize civilian oversight effectiveness?
So I don't know of any actual entity that is working to minimize it. I can't name any, but I will say that law enforcement are really good organizers. They're really good at social media. And so if there's any of them that want to do that, they'd probably be able to do it pretty effectively.
So this is going to be our last question.
Okay.
And I think it's a big one, but I think you can handle it. So,
Thank
our
you.
commission is newly formed. Many have no training, no onboarding, so to speak. It
Mhm.
seems county driven. Any suggestions?
Yeah, so so going back first to the ordinance to see what you're allowed to do and what level of independence from kind of the day-to-day county structure you have. I think that demanding training is an absolute must. When I mentioned earlier that I had been a civilian review board member, I had all of the best intentions as this, wide-eyed 20-something person going on to a board. But once I knew my community, I knew lots of things about my greater community, but I knew zero about civilian oversight. I knew zero about police practices and procedures. And so training so that I knew how to do the work that I was appointed to do is an absolute must. Otherwise, you fail. And you don't want to be set up for failure. So demanding that you're given the tools you need to make it work is the place to start. And building relationships with stakeholders outside of your oversight mechanism to help you demand those things. Because if you don't have the tools you need, you're not going to be helpful in the long run to community, to law enforcement, to the politicians who put this in place. So kind of going about it uh, that way is really important. I mean, training cannot be emphasized enough and its importance.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Elsa.
Oh,
Elsa, you're on mute.
Thanks, Katrina. Cami, thank you so much. I have to say, thank you also for being as realistic with us as you were. I mean, not just handing us the icing on the cake, but saying, really takes a long time to build that cake and to keep it fresh. And the idea of self-evaluation, I thought, was very important, as is true with any board. But not to get too cocky in what we are thinking and doing, but to keep learning ourselves and to realize that the whole environment, the whole world keeps changing, and we need to not remain static, not say, "Oh, good, we did it," or "Oh, good, we figured out the ordinance." So thank you for all of that, as well as for being realistic in about some of the bumps we're experiencing, just as we try and get started with all of this. Anything you think of later, we'd love to hear about too, by the way. We're so glad you're in this role. And could you say one more sentence about the national convention that's going to happen soon?
absolutely. Thank you, because my board will be so excited that you asked that. So we have an annual conference. This year will be our 31st, and we are holding it in Minneapolis, Minnesota, October 26th through the 30th. The set the um the event is really, I went to my first one weeks after I'd been appointed to board. And one of the most amazing pieces of it, I mean, it had great training, and I appreciated that as well. But I was able to go, and it was amazing to see all of the people who were doing the same work that I was doing, and that I wasn't doing it alone. That I had friends all over the country that I could then network with, I could ask questions of, that I could commiserate with, that I could have a moment where I didn't have to reinvent the wheel, because chances are they'd already gone through the same thing that I had gone through, or the issue that we needed to fix, they'd probably already worked on. So it was almost like finding a new family, to be honest. And the best part is that it's like that every year. Sometimes I refer to it as almost like a family reunion. And there are some people on this call that I have known for years from those conferences that I can't wait to see next month. Charmaine, Jerry, can't wait. And so I think that it also provides a lot of really important training and conversations about civilian oversight and some issues that are peripheral to it. And then on Sunday, the first day, the 26th, we have specialized forums. One is for board and commission members, where we do a little bit of training, but then there's also talking about issues that are very specific to being a volunteer board or commission member. We have one for executive directors. And then this year we have a new one that is specifically for investigators. So more information about that is on our website. I'm also happy to answer any questions that you have offline on the conference, but it would be lovely to see many of you there next month.
Well done. I just have to say, after the 2 days in San Francisco, I was so blown away, and it's taken a long time just to munch it in my own head. So 4 days, but training also, which,
Mhm.
as you heard, was underline the key thing. Cami, thank you so much again. We'd like to turn it back to Trina now, who has jobs for all of us. So please stay eagerly attuned. Trina.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So just a couple of things, and that is we have a couple of events coming up. The first one is a fun event that we have every third Tuesday of the month, and that is our monthly happy hour. The next one will be on the 16th, a week from today, starting at 4:30 at Worst Hall in San Mateo, and that is at 310 Baldwin, and it is right next to the Caltrain station. So please feel free to join us there just for some fun times, get together and chat and be in community and support each other. And unfortunately, Worst Hall is closing at the end of this month. So it will be our last happy hour event there. And we've had some very fun events. So that's unfortunate, but please feel free to join us. There's no RSVP or anything. Just stop on by. And then next we have on October 7th, our next all hands meeting, where the topic will be on tasers. And it will cover some new information about tasers, some misinformation about tasers, and I know it will prove to be a very interesting and worthwhile topic. So please feel free to join us again October 7th at 7 p.m. for our presentation on tasers. And with that, I
Trina, I'm so sorry. May I add one more?
please.
When I said homework, I also meant when the call goes out in our newsletters or in Nancy Goodman's wonderful emails saying there's a Board of Supervisors meeting this Tuesday, please write ahead of time. Please sign this petition, and really that morning, please be there in person if you can to make a public comment. Or if you can't be there, could you please just keep the Zoom on in the background of your work or whatever, and then step over for a 1-minute comment. That's all we get these days for public comment, because those really have impact. All 5 supervisors hear them at the same time. Their staffs hear them. So please, please, it's so easy to do. 1 minute is not a lot of speaking. And Nancy gives you all those great hints about try this angle or that. It helps us so much. We have been in meetings where people on the board staffs will say, yeah, but you're just one voice for whomever's around the table. So please add your voices. You are powerful, and your voice is your power. Thank you so much.
And I have one more thing. I promise it's just one. And this is a save the date. It will be our annual winter party, Friday,
December 5th.
December 5th at the Domini Hoskins Black History Museum in Redwood City. Our parties are always a fun time, so we hope to see you all there. So save the date for Friday, December 5th. And I believe with that, it is 8 o'clock and we can say good night. Thank you all so very much for coming. Much appreciated.